Stops along the way today so that you can get out and take some photographs. We will be stopping for a morning tea break at about 10:30, and that includes tea, coffee, water and scones with jam and cream. Best scones on Norfolk in my opinion. Yeah. It is $5 if you'd like to join in with the morning tea. It's not compulsory. It's only if you would like to join in. Now I'm going to be covering a bit of every topic today, from a bit of our Norfolk language, why are the cows on the road, to the cost of petrol and power, and also about our history, okay? Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like, but if possible, if you could try and hold on to your questions until we get to each stop. Just if I'm busy answering your questions on the road, I might forget to point out something important to you as we drive past, okay? And I don't want to miss anything for you. But otherwise, feel free to bombard me with questions, that's not a problem. I'm going to be bombarding you with a bit of our history to start off with. Just because our very first look out, it'll make a bit more sense if you know a bit about our history, if you know exactly what you're looking down at, okay? Alrighty. So we're a very small island here over on Norfolk Island. We're only 8 kilometres by 5 kilometres. We have a population of about 1,800 people, give or take. And about a third of our population have ties to the Mutiny on the Bounty descendants. Do you all know a little bit about the Mutiny on the Bounty? Yes? Okay, well I'll touch on that very shortly as well. So it works out to be quite an even community. We've got a third locals born and bred here on the island, about a third from New Zealand, and the other third are from Australia. So it's very even. Even though we're only 8 kilometres by 5 kilometres, we have 170 kilometres of road on the island, so we've got plenty of roads. It's looking nice and green at the moment. We didn't have any rain until about 3-4 weeks ago, and before that our last lot of rain was November, so everything was very brown, not very pleasant, but it certainly greened up very quickly. We solely rely on rainwater. We have no water supply, so we all have tanks or bores on our properties. We get an average of about 50 inches of rain per year. It's a very windy location here on the island as well, just because we're in the middle of the South Pacific. And we have the same winter months that you do. So June, July, August are our winter months. So it's quite pleasant here in winter. We get up to about 18 degrees during the day, and only down to about 10 or 11 degrees at night. So it's very pleasant. Coming up to the Norfolk Island Central School on the left-hand side. We have about 300 students that attend the school. That goes from kindergarten all the way up to year 12. There's about 26 teachers, and they all come over mostly from Australia. They get it pretty good. They get all their travel costs covered for them, relocation costs. They get subsidised living once they get to the island. They can go to the beach on their lunch break. Not bad at all. Where I was going to pull into vehicle. So Captain James Cook discovered Norfolk Island back in 1774, and he took one look at our Norfolk pines and he thought they would be excellent for our British ships, masts and spars, but he was wrong. Our Norfolk pine is too knotty, it's too brittle. It's our most versatile timber on the island. We use it for pretty much everything else, but it was not suitable for the British ships. So they were a bit disappointed with that. We keep all the pine trees that we mill here on the island. We don't send any of it off island. There's about 2 major sawmills on the island, and then a lot of people also have their own little homemade ones on their property as well. The pine trees, they can grow up to about 1,000 years of age, 45 metres tall. and they're fully matured once they reach 60 to 80 years old. We're coming up to a row of pine trees on the right hand side. This area is called Muddy Water, and these pine trees up here are about 30 to 35 years of age, just to give you an idea on their size. Some people ask us what's the difference between the different pine trees on the island. We only have one type of pine tree. Some of them are simply just older or newer than others, so that's why they might look a little bit different. Whatever you do, if you live in the suburbs, you do not want to plant a pine tree next to your house. The root system is about the same length as the tree trunk. So your neighbours are going to love you. So a bit about our history. So Norfolk Island has had 3 major British settlements over the years. The first settlement was a farming settlement from 1788 to 1814. The second settlement, our penal settlement, from 1825 to 1855, so that lasted 30 years. And the third settlement from 1856 to the present day, so we're currently in the third settlement. So the first settlement, farming. So British farmers were sent here to Norfolk Island assisted by convict labour, as they wanted Norfolk to be settled before the first fleet arrived in Australia. So Norfolk was settled 40 days after Port Jackson, and it was designed so that we could provide food to New South Wales while they were still establishing themselves agriculturally. The convicts that came here at the time, they had a great time. There was no jail for them. It was quite a free experience. You know, they felt very free because they were working outside all the time. They were treated really well, fed really well. It was a great time for those convicts. Now the first settlement closed down pretty quickly once they noticed there were some French ships hovering out in the waters, and at that time England were at war with the French, so they didn't want any troubles, so they all packed up and went home, ending the first settlement. So 1825 came along, so about 9-10 years later, and that was our penal settlement. So overcrowding of British jails created the second settlement. And it was not a very nice place to be. The convicts that were here for that 30-year period were treated awfully. You couldn't have been treated worse. Worked long, hard days, crammed into tiny cells, barely fed. It really was what they called hell in paradise. So not a nice place to be. Due to financial reasons, they ended up moving the military and all the convicts over to Tasmania, which ended the second settlement. But we also believe it's due to the cruelty bestowed upon the convicts as well. So we think Britain were a little bit ashamed of how they treated those convicts for those 30 years, and they didn't really want anyone knowing about it. So 1855 is when that second settlement closed down. And here we are today, 1856 was when our third settlement started. So in 1856, the entire community of Pitcairn Island were relocated here to Norfolk Island. So Pitcairn Island is an incredibly small island in the middle of nowhere. If you're looking at a map, it's sort of between Rockhampton and South America, if you can picture that. And today there's approximately about 47, 48 people living on Pitcairn Island. So they are British subjects living on British soil. Now, back in 1856, when these Pitcairners were moved here to Norfolk Island, there was 194 of them at the time, and they could see a threat of starvation in their future just because of their growing population. So because they were British subjects, they decided to send a message to the Queen, to Queen Victoria. They said, is there anywhere that you could relocate us to? And she said, okay, I know of this little island called Norfolk Island. I'd love to have British subjects living on Norfolk Island, because it did belong to the British. I will relocate your entire population to Norfolk Island free of charge, and will give each family 50 acres of land when you arrive. They said, yes please, we're coming. So on the 8th of June 1856, the day we celebrate as our Bounty Day, 194 people from Pitcairn Island arrived here on Norfolk Island. It was a 5-week journey. It was 6,000 kilometres they had to travel, so it was quite a distance to travel. Now those people that arrived here on Norfolk from Pitcairn were the second and third generations of Fletcher Christian, his men and the Tahitian women from the mutiny on the Bounty. So Fletcher Christian never came to Norfolk Island, okay? So the voyage of the Bounty. The Bounty was currently about 16 months into their journey, and it was captained by a man named Captain William Bligh. Not a very nice man. We believe he was a very good captain in the sense of his navigational skills and everything, but when it came to managing his team on board, it was not very pleasant at all. So one day a young sailor named Fletcher Christian, he was 23 years of age at the time, he decided to take over the ship. So he got a few of the guys together and he said, okay, I want to take over the ship, who's with me? Now some of the guys said yes, because they'd had enough of Captain Bligh as well, and some of them said no. So about 3 nights later, the men that had said no, along with Captain William Bligh, were taken out of their bunks in the middle of the night, thrown into a little rowboat with some supplies and sent out to sea, which is what caused the mutiny on the Bounty, a hanging offence. So Fletcher Christian took over the ship with his men and they decided to go back to Tahiti, where they'd currently spent some time. They were quite fond of the Tahitian women. So about 3 months they were living on Tahiti for, and Fletcher Christian decided that they were a little bit too in the open. So he got his guys together and he said, okay, we need to jump back on the ship and go find somewhere to stay where we can't be found. Now some of the guys didn't want to go because they'd met these beautiful Tahitian women who refused to leave Tahiti. And then the guys that did decide to go with Fletcher Christian, they were allowed to bring their girlfriends or wives with them. So they jumped on board the Bounty ship and headed out to sea, and they came across Pitcairn Island. They lived on Pitcairn Island for about 18 years before they were discovered by an American whaler that had been blown off course. So they got away with the mutiny. They were never found. They were never caught. There's conflicting stories as to where Fletcher Christian ended up. Some say that he was murdered on Pitcairn Island, and others say that he was spotted back in England. So we just never really know. Now the men that decided to stay on Tahiti with their girlfriends and wives, they were caught about 3 months later. So Fletcher Christian made a good move to get off Tahiti. So those men were put onto a ship called the Pandora and sent back to England, but they were wrecked on the Great Barrier Reef. So after all that, only about 5 of the mutineers survived, and once they eventually got back to England, 2 of them were pardoned and 3 were hung. So goodness knows how they decided which ones to hang and which ones not to hang. So here on Norfolk Island to this day, we now have up to 9th generations of Fletcher Christian and his men and the Tahitian women. I myself am a 7th descendant of Fletcher Christian. My dad was a 6th descendant. So my parents used to live here on the island, and they simply just moved back to New Zealand before they had kids. So dad went to school here and everything. So hence why I have the New Zealand accent. But I'm also now an Australian citizen, and I'm a descendant of Fletcher Christian, which makes me a local here on Norfolk Island. So go figure, take your pick.
How does it feel to be part of a legend?
Oh, it feels pretty damn good, to be honest. I like it. It's great history. Very cool history. I mean, he's a criminal, but it's a very good history. So that's our 3 settlements. First settlement, farming. Second settlement, the penal settlement. And the third settlement is the relocation of our British subjects on Pitcairn Island. Now out to the left-hand side, you will see 2 uninhabited bird sanctuaries. The larger island is Phillip Island. It's about 7 kilometres away from the shore, named after Governor Arthur Phillip. And the smaller island is Nepean Island. It's about 3 kilometres away from shore. Nobody lives out there. There is now a fisherman's hut out at the base of Phillip Island, so locals can apply to go and camp out there. They even have NBN internet out there now. Wow. Yes. Now during the second settlement, pigs, rats and goats were released out on Phillip Island for sport for the military. They needed something to do when they weren't torturing convicts. And about 28 years ago, we went over there and eradicated the rest of the the rabbits, because that's all that was left out there. And we started replanting 43 indigenous plants that you can find here on Norfolk. So Phillip Island is looking a lot healthier now than what it was about 50 years ago. So we're now going to be stopping down at the Queen Elizabeth Lookout. It was opened by Her Majesty in 1974, and you're going to be looking down at the oldest established Georgian settlement in the southern hemisphere. This area is called Kingston. It is totally under World Heritage. Nobody owns the area, And every wall, every building that you can see was built by the convicts during their 30-year period, which is quite impressive when you think of what tools they had back then. Now when we get back on board, we will be driving down through the Kingston area, and I will then explain to you what each building is as we make our way down. Some of the homes are occupied by staff on the island, which I will explain, and some of them are available for you to go in and have a look at. So I'll point all that out to you. Now the stone of all the buildings is made of calcarenite, which is a combination of sandstone and coral. Okay. So we'll hop off down here so that you can have a look around. This is the other bus that's joining us on our half-day tour today. Max is their driver, so when we get to most of the stops he'll be there. We've taken a bit longer today, so I think he's on his way out. Well, let's hop out down here so we can take some photos.
Well, this is our view. It's Quality Road down there. You can see government house and things. Right out. Emily Beach. And the beach is the other one. This is the ocean. Green.
Oh, Chris, look at this. Chair.
Yes, nice terraced landscape. Near the sea.
I believe so. I'll just bring the bus down further. The other one's gone.
I think we've got enough. This is the Queen Elizabeth lookout. Marc was unveiled by Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of the royal visit to Norfolk Island in February 1974. And bicentenary year of the discovery of the island by Captain James Cook on 10th of October 1770.
Takes a while. Yeah. We just had a question there. We don't know how they found White Paint. Who had what? Again, no, you can't be painted.
Oh, we're still at the lookout now. Valley behind it.
Beautiful view, isn't it? So remember, you can always come back here in your own rental car as well and take photos.
Yeah.
But you'd still touch it here, would you?
So down below, there are 11 Georgian homes. They're of the typical Georgian design, with a living area in the front, which consists of 2 bedrooms and a study. And at the rear there is a courtyard separating the smaller building, and the smaller building are the service quarters, so kitchen, wash house, laundry, etc. Now these homes were originally built for the 1st, 2nd and 3rd class officers and their families. Now today, 5 of these restored homes are occupied, but only for a period of 2 years. So that's for anyone that comes to the island for a specific role. So they could be a doctor or a member of the administrative staff for the council, anything like that. So they've only got 2-year contracts and they reside in 5 of the homes below. So nobody owns the homes, they are totally under World Heritage, but it is a very desirable address. They're on Quality Row. It used to be called Military Row, but once the Pitcairners arrived here in 1856, they changed it to Quality Row due to the quality of the homes. So restoration for these buildings comes from World Heritage, so we apply for grants. All the lawns are all maintained by the gardeners and the maintenance team for the council. So they get to live in some lovely accommodations down there. 86 men were hung during the 30-year period that the convicts were on the island, which is not too bad considering it's 30 years, I guess, considering that time. But it's recorded that 3,019 men committed suicide during that 30 years. If you committed suicide, you were buried where you were found. So we're a haunted little island too. Now, on a Tuesday and a Friday afternoon, we offer a convict settlement tour. It's a 3-hour extensive tour about the second settlement. So you go for a good walk through the old jail, have explained to you how the convicts live, what their day-to-day life was, and everything about the jail. And then you also end up down at the cemetery and go for a guided tour through the old cemetery as well. So if you'd like to learn a lot more about that second settlement, I would highly recommend the Convict Settlement Tour, and our next one is on Friday afternoon. Straight ahead is number 11 Quality Row. It was originally for the Catholic priest. We now use it for officers. That's our football field and everything to the right hand side for our touch football teams. There's also a cricket pitch in the middle. It's meant to be the oldest cricket pitch in the Southern Hemisphere. This wall here on your left hand side is one of the 2 military barracks. It was built in 1829. It's now got our courthouse inside its walls. Now we try to make all of our tours non-political, okay? We like to just focus on the positive things about our island. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how Australia took over Norfolk Island 5 years ago in 2016, you can pop in and have a chat to the people that have been camping down here since 2016. So that's our tent embassy. So any of the green hands that you see up around the place, that's the hands up for democracy symbol, okay? Over on the right hand side behind the white picket fence is Government House. It was originally built for the Commandant in 1829. And now the administrator of Norfolk Island resides there. His name's Eric Hutchinson. He's from Tasmania. He gets appointed by Canberra, and he's actually in his 2nd term at the moment. He's a lovely, lovely man. A single man living in a 25-bedroom home. Not too shabby. He's got 5 full-time staff. Now the next 2 homes on the left-hand side are unoccupied, so you're able to go in and have a look. The first one here, number 10 Quality Row, is one of 4 museums in the Kingston area. They're open Monday to Saturday 11 till 3. And the next home on the left-hand side, number 9 Quality Row, is our research centre. So if you have any suspicions that Uncle Fred might have been a convict, this is where you come to find out. So that's the research centre. All the rest of these homes are now occupied by staff. Coming up on the right hand side is our local golf course. It's a 9-hole golf course with 18 different tees. You can hire golf balls, buggies, clubs, you name it. It's a very popular golf course in the Southern Hemisphere. We have a lot of tournaments here, and lots of people would come over from Australia and normally New Zealand when they can travel. Now this home on the left hand side will never be restored. However, the next home, the duplex, is in the process of being restored. It is meant to be one of the most haunted homes in all of Australia. It made the list. I've heard some stories as well. I've not experienced anything yet, but I've certainly heard some of the stories. We have one main cemetery on the island that we use now. It is very expensive to be buried on the island. It costs 2 cartons of beer for the volunteer grave diggers. We're very lucky over here. The coffins are provided to you. A beautiful white coffin is provided by the council. They also give you a little white cross with your name and dates stamped on it. Local ladies make wreaths. The hearse driver volunteers his time. And we have 12 volunteer grave diggers that come in and dig the graves by hand. It's always maintained by our full-time sexton. So we're very, very lucky here. Not a bad final resting spot, is it? With a view like that. The oldest grave in there is from 1793. You'll learn a lot more about the cemetery if you do our convict settlement tour. Now in the middle of the cemetery you'll see 4 large pillars. That separates the different settlements. Now to the left hand side of those pillars you would think that it's fairly empty, wouldn't you? There's not many headstones. It's actually completely full. We cannot bury anyone past that point. It is completely full. Colleen McCulloch is buried down here and she's not far from those pillars if you come looking for her, okay? A very basic headstone she's got as well. That's our famous author, Colleen McCulloch. If you committed suicide, you were not allowed to be buried in the cemetery. So any convicts that were buried in the cemetery had to have died of natural causes. This area of water just behind the cemetery, that's called Cemetery Bay. It's the only dog beach on the island where you can take your dog for a bit of a run. Nice little swimming area as well if it's low tide. So we're about to drive over Bloody Bridge. Bloody Bridge, it was built by the convicts. And one day they just weren't very happy with their overseer. So what did they do? What do you do when you don't like your boss? You kill him. They buried him inside the bridge while they were building it. And when the guards came to collect them at the end of the day, they noticed blood oozing out of the side of the bridge. It was originally a double-lane bridge, but some bad weather destroyed half of it. So now it is a single-lane bridge. This here is Bloody Bridge. You'll see lots of plaques around the island, folks. If you are doing a little drive yourself, just pull over and have a bit of a read of them all. You'll get some great information about certain areas like this. So we're going to turn around here and head back into the Kingston area. Go past the old jail. We have no native animals here on the island. We've got about 52 variety of bird life, mostly seabirds. We have no snakes, no poisonous spiders, no foxes or possums, way too many feral chooks.
What happened to all the native animals?
What happened to them? We never had any native animals.
Never was it?
No.
Okay.
Fishing is a very popular sport here on the island. We love our fresh local fish. We catch a lot of red-throated emperor, also known as trumpeter. That's what you'll find a lot of at the restaurants, along with kingfish. We also catch snapper, tuna, groper, dolphin fish, marlin. So we're very spoiled when it comes to our fish, or fish. I'm not Australian. Now we have 2 main landing points on the island, and the only reason we have 2 is because the average height of our cliffs are about 300 feet. So we're going to head over to one of our landing points, which is Kingston Pier. So this is how all of our boats get into the water from one of our 2 landing points. It's either Kingston or Cascade. Usually if it's rough on one side of the island, it's a lot smoother on the other side to be able to lower boats in and out of the water. Now, all of our goods that come to the island all come on a cargo ship, or ship. So the cargo ships come to the island, and but the problem is they can't just pull up straight next to the pier because our waters are too shallow and because we have a reef down here at Kingston. So what the cargo ship has to do is they have to sit about 300 metres away from shore, and we send out a little rowboat which we call a lighter, and that lighter is towed by a launch. So the launch is a boat with a motor. So we tow these lighters out to the side of the cargo ship 300 metres out, and they have large cranes that lower all of our goods into the lighters, and then we tow them back into the pier where they're lifted out with another crane on the pier. Now this can only be done when the seas are nice and flat. If it's too rough, it's too dangerous, because by the time the boat gets in to the side of the pier, you could easily be washed into the rocks. So it's quite a dangerous job. We meant to get a cargo ship every sort of 2 months max. At the moment we seem to be averaging every 3 months, which is why we're a bit limited with our food supplies and Foodland supermarket at the moment. So when that happens, we have air freighters come to the island, but the downside with air freighters, even though it arrives here within days, it just makes it very expensive. It's about $5 a kilo if you want to bring anything in on the air freighter. So that just bumps up all the cost of our goods here. So that's why we rely on the cargo ship. The last one was here Boxing Day last year. The next one is due in at the end of this month. So it's been a very dry spell here for us with our all of our food and everything.
Where do you bring it from usually?
So the cargo ship starts off in Australia and it goes to New Zealand, picks up more goods in New Zealand, and then comes directly here to Norfolk. Now sometimes the cargo ship will come to the island and it will sit here for about 10 days and won't be able to unload because of the weather, and then they have to turn around and head back to New Zealand or Australia. So then we go probably another 6 weeks without supplies. The long wall over there, the 2 walls, that's the old jail. It used to house about 1,700 convicts. The smaller wall was designed for the well-behaved convicts, and the larger wall was designed for the not so well-behaved convicts. So like I said, you can learn a lot more about that on our convict settlement tour. This is our war memorial here on the left, our cenotaph. The brown building up on the hill over there, will be coming up on your right, that was the original government house. The old ruins to the left of it, so right on the corner here by the road, that was the old hospital. Now convicts used to fake sickies because they'd had enough of all the hard working that they had to do, and the commandant at the time said, well, if you're too ill to work, you are too ill to eat. So then they wouldn't be fed. So they learned very quickly not to do that. We are at the Kingston Pier. It was built in 1829 by the convicts, and these are some examples of our old lighters. So for obvious reasons we don't use these ones anymore, but our new ones look exactly the same as this one here on the left, just not broken down and rusted. So they're white with a blue trim. One car can fit inside these lighters. Now you have to realise all these buses had to come to the island as well somehow. They also came on the lighters. So what we would do, we would strap 2 lighter boats together with some telephone poles, and the buses would be lowered over the side of the ship with a crane and popped into the bus would have to straddle the 2 lighters, and then they have to pull up here against the pier and then get lifted out with another crane. I've only ever seen one bus come to shore. It was the coolest thing I think I've ever seen. It was a little bit rough that day, so as the bus was being lifted out of the water, the crane starts to swing and all of a sudden the bus goes crashing into the side of the pier. Now there is a reef that runs from just to the right hand side where that water is breaking, the right hand side of the pier, and the reef runs all the way out to Lone Pine. Can you pick where Lone Pine might be? Lone Pine. So that's our next stop up there, folks. So what that means is, because the reef runs all the way along here, it means it's very, very safe for swimming in this area. Very safe because there's no sharks that can come in.
Is there any plans to build a landing place?
Oh, there's many plans. It's just whether they can be executed or not, to build another port or something. It's just because our seas get so rough, so we're trying to build one in an area where it's guaranteed to always be flat. But where do you find that place in the middle of the ocean? This area of water here on the right is called Slaughter Bay. Slaughter simply means slow moving water. So a lot of the guys will go and swim out here on the right and climb over the reef and go surfing. Otherwise we have a lot of windsurfers through this area, and a lot of people go snorkeling. You can hire snorkel equipment from a store in town called Land and Sea. So you can just park in this little bay here and just go out in the water here. You don't swim out past the reef. Emily Bay is coming up next. It's my favourite beach on the whole island. It's the main swimming beach as well because it's so safe. Nice and flat for lots of kids. Beautiful spot to have a barbecue and a picnic. So this is Emily Bay, named after one of the commandant's wives. A few people are going for a swim now. Another tour company having a little tour at the moment. During December and January, locals can apply to come and camp down here, and they camp just inside the wooden fence there amongst the pine trees, so that'll be completely covered with tents and tarpaulins and everything. Some people will have solar showers and fridges plugged into generators, you name it. If you'd like to go out in the water but you're not a big fan of swimming, you can always jump on the glass bottom boat. We can either book it for you at Pine Tree Tours, or you can just meet the driver down here at the time allocated on the blackboard and pay the driver directly. So it all depends on the tides as to when they can operate their tours. These are the glass bottom boats. We're now coming up to the back of the golf course. Point Hunter it's called. Plenty of barbecue areas around this side as well, folks, so help yourselves. Now over on the right in a moment you're going to be looking at a building with no roof and a very tall chimney. That is the old salt house. So convicts would process boiled salt water to obtain domestic salt. Another great barbecue spot. I'm all about food on this island. Now this pine tree up here, when Captain Cook discovered Norfolk in 1774, he did a sketch of this area. And that pine tree was fully matured in that sketch. So remember, at 60 to 80 years of age, the pine trees need to be fully matured. And that'll give you an idea on how old that pine tree is. So we'll get out here and take some photos. If you could please just stay along the water edge, so don't disappear over here to the left. Just so we don't lose anybody. You can always come back down here and take more photos.
These are the rocks of Emily Bay and some of them. This is the tree Captain Cook sketched. So it must be 300 years old. See if we can get the person who's swimming. It's just very hard to focus in the sunlight.
power is diesel generated here. We have 6 diesel generators at our powerhouse, which is located around by the airport, and we pay about 71 cents per unit for power. I believe in Australia at the moment it's about 28 cents per unit, so it's very expensive for power over here. Some homes have got solar power, but we're not allowed to get solar power anymore because our generators wouldn't be able to handle the amount of power going into the generator. So that's also why we don't have much air conditioning. Anyone that's got air conditioning had to apply for it. There had to be a legitimate reason as to why you were allowed it. So that's why everything we rely on ceiling fans and pedestal fans. Our temperature, we're lucky we only get up to about 26 degrees, but we do get 100% humidity. So that's what you can't escape the humidity. February, March is actually our worst time. Well, usually February is our worst time for humidity, which can lead into the month of March, but sometimes, so far it's been not too bad. There's usually about a week in November as well that we get the really high humidities. Petrol, we pay about $2.33 a litre. Luckily we don't have too far to travel. Now, Australian and New Zealand citizens are now allowed to move to Norfolk Island and buy land or buy properties without needing a permit. That changed about 8 years ago. Before that you had to apply for a temporary entry permit if you wanted to move to the island. And sometimes if you were buying a business, the business would come with Norfolk residency, and then if you sold your business you were selling your residency as well. So luckily all that's changed, so you can move here indefinitely. If you were going to move to the island, I would recommend maybe coming and spending 3 months here and rent a property and see how you like it first. It is the isolation that people really struggle with when they come to the island. Even though you can get off the island quite easily, it is very expensive for flights. You're looking at anywhere from about $6.50 on special plus return to Australia. We have flights at the moment from Brisbane and Sydney every day of the week except for Sunday. Air New Zealand used to operate flights direct from Auckland in New Zealand, but they found that the flights just wasn't viable for them to continue because they weren't getting full flights, so they ended up pulling out. Whereas when Air New Zealand fly from Brisbane or Sydney, the Australian government subsidises those flights for them. So we had no service from Auckland for a little while, and then an airline called Air Nauru decided to pick up the route, and they lasted about 12 months before they then pulled out. So then we were left stranded again, and then Air Chatham's decided to take over. So they bring over a little 40-seater aircraft from Auckland. It's about $900 return for an hour-and-a-half flight. But they stopped flying here just because of COVID, so once it all opens up from New Zealand to here, then they'll be able to operate those flights again. So if I was to go home and see my family prior to COVID, if I didn't want to travel on the 1 day a week when they offered the service for Auckland, I would have to fly through Australia, and it would take me about 12 hours to get there. So by the time you check in here at the airport, 2.5 hour flight to Brisbane or Sydney, and then you had to make sure you allowed about 2 hours on the ground in Australia before catching your connecting flight, and then about a 3-hour flight over to New Zealand, which I've done a couple of times if I had to, and I've paid $1,600 return once for one of those fares. Even from Australia I've travelled to Europe for $1,100 return, and it cost me $500 more to go to New Zealand. You just can't win these days. I remember because I moved here almost 8 years ago, and just so prior to that, when I used to travel over for holidays, I would pay a $400 return airfare with Air New Zealand from Auckland. So I don't know why the flights seem to be getting more expensive these days, because you'd think it should get cheaper, but it actually is a lot more expensive to fly these short distances than it is to fly to America or fly to Europe. Saturday morning in town, I'll point that out to you when we make our way through, and every Sunday morning is the arts and crafts markets. Farmers markets, you need to be there by about 7:30 in the morning, and the arts and crafts markets on a Sunday starts at 8:30. the locals do tend to eat a lot better than the tourists do, unfortunately, and that's just because we grow a lot of our own vegetables at home. But we can only grow what is in season at the time. So you will usually end up with a lot of carrots and potatoes all at the same time, and then come winter, broccoli and cauliflower grow really well. So it's all just seasonal here. It is a lot cheaper to buy a home than it is to buy land and try and build a house. It costs probably twice as much if you wanted to build a house. And that's just because you have to bring all the equipment and all the timber and everything on the cargo ships. There are 2 hardware stores on the island, so that's where you can buy a lot of it, but it just depends if they sell out at the moment. So I know they're all pretty scarce at the moment because we're waiting for the cargo ship to arrive. So if you ever wanted to buy anything here, you'd want to be looking at buying a home instead of buying land and building a home.
What houses went in?
I saw a house go on the market the other day for about 260,000, and there's also houses on the market up to 1.3 million. There's a lot of accommodation places for sale at the moment too, if that's something you might be interested in. So I just jump on the Norfolk Island real estate website and have a look on there. There was a time that houses were not selling very well at all, and that's just because we weren't having any new people come to the island. But since we've opened up the borders so that New Zealanders and Australians can move here so easily, houses are on the market for a month and then they're sold, which is great. So this is Middlegate Road. This leads up to Cascade Road, which will take us down to our second landing point on the island, Cascade Bay. So here we are back at that roundabout by the school. This is a new roundabout, was only built last year. People still don't know how to use it. Before this we only ever had one roundabout in the middle of town. And that only had the 2 exits, whereas this has got, there's 4 in total, so people get a little bit confused. So here we are back at the Norfolk Island Central School. It's only 30 kilometres if you're driving past the school during school hours. It's 40 if you're driving through town, and 50 kilometres an hour if you're driving around the rest of the island. So just keep your eyes peeled on the change of the sign, speed limits. The opportunity shop here on the left with the red roof, everything's about $4 at the moment. What I love about this road, and it's only this road on the island that do it, Cascade Road, is people like to name their properties something roof. So I'm going to point out a few of my favourites to you. Just getting out of the way of all the traffic. Now the cows do have the right of way on the island, so you're not allowed to hit a cow. There is a $200 fine if you do. That little calf that's running around must be quite new. They're always a little bit skittish when they're brand spanking new. As you can see with the older calves and the other cows, they know that they rule the roads. So. Oh, this one wanted to catch up. This is also why our speed limits are so low as well, just so that you don't come around a corner at night and run into a cow, so just be very cautious. So this property here on the left, this girl is a young girl that's inherited this land from her family, so one day she's going to build a house on it. So they've named her property, because her name is Tilly, Tilly's One Day Roof. Now along with our pine trees, we also have a lot of palm trees on the island. They're called Kentia Palms with a K. They're indigenous to Lord Howe Island. So we grow the palms, harvest the seed, and we send them off island to other nurseries. This used to be a huge money-making business. It was about $1,100 a bushel to send off island. Now it's only about $30 to $40 a bushel. Some of the trees you'll see a metal collar around the neck, and that's to stop the rats from climbing up and eating the seeds. Here's a group of the Kentia Palms on our right-hand side. This flag here on the left-hand side, there's a wooden sign just next to it. It's in the Norfolk language. Can't see the roof. Because you can't see the roof.
And the red roof.
And then there's some of our typical ones like red roof, And there's a silver roof coming up as well. I'm just pointing out my favourites though. This road we're driving on from one pier to the other was one of the very first roads built by the convicts. About 30% of our roads were convict built. There's another sign here, the blue sign.
Leaky roof.
Leaky roof, which is very true, I've been told.
Longer roof.
And this orange fence here. Roof, roof. Very clever. Now, a lot of our locals have nicknames here on the island. Problem is that a lot of them, we only know them by their nickname. We know their last name, but we might not know their first name because we always use their nicknames. So what happens is you go to pick up the Norfolk Island phone book to ring one of these people and you think, how do I look someone up when I don't know their name? So if you go to the very back of the Norfolk Island phone book, you'll see a list of everyone's names alphabetically by their nickname. So to give you an idea of some of the nicknames of people on the island, just off the top of my head, there's Rugs, Bear, Slack, Fishy, Freshy, Stalky, Tardy, Slack, Pony. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. And these people go by their nicknames. Now down at Cascade Bay where we're heading to, on the left hand side there's going to be a platform and there is an old whaling station there. So whaling was, what do we call it? Whaling was our longest standing industry on the island so far, okay? So there was a huge whaling factory here, 1859 to 1962. That was to obtain whale oil. So whales are now protected here on the island, which is great. And it's mostly humpback whales that we see in our waters. But on the left hand side, when we get down to Cascade Bay, you'll see one of our old boilers. So Kingston was the southern side of the island. We're now heading to the northern side of the island. Now, when our cruise ships arrive on the island, the same applies as when the cargo ships arrive. So they have to sit about 300 metres out to sea. And we had 3 tender boats built. So we used to use the boats from the cruise ships, but now we have our own tender boats. They seat about 90 people each. They were built in Port Macquarie. And it cost about $5 million to have them built. They've only been used maybe twice. And they're sitting down on the platform here as well. So that's 3 tender boats. So when the cruise ships arrive, again, the seas have to be nice and flat in order for us to be able to offload passengers. So when those people do book a cruise, they are made aware that the chances of getting off on Norfolk Island are very slim. Even if we were due to have, say, 20 cruise ships in a 12-month period, we might be lucky if 3 of them get ashore. So that's why we're trying to look at alternative options for building another pier somewhere on the island, just to be able to increase those options. But again, it's also very expensive. New Caledonia is actually our nearest neighbour from Norfolk. They're about 700 kilometres away. New Zealand is 1,000 kilometres away, and Brisbane and Sydney are about 1,600 to 1,700 kilometres away from Norfolk.
Can you put in for government grants for things like
Yeah, we can put in for government grants, it's just as to whether they approve it or not. Because all our funding comes from Australia. Oh, perfect timing. This boat's either coming into the water or coming out of the water. So that pier down there, that was renovated a couple of years ago. It was raised 1 metre and extended 4 metres, and it cost about $20 million. It includes that new blue crane. They can lift up to 50 tonne.
How do these boats here get from where they're sitting down to the crane?
So as you can see there's a trailer behind the white truck.
So they get loaded onto that trailer.
So we just back the trailer up directly underneath the crane.
Yeah, I can see for those little ones, but the ones up behind the tent.
Oh, they've got a portable chassis. So they get moved down here on a massive truck and backed up underneath the crane and then lifted in with the blue crane.
This is the main loading pier, isn't it?
It just depends on the weather. So this is the one that got renovated. But it just depends. If it's a nice day, you'll have, I mean, I saw some boats had gone out down Kingston, so it must just be fairly flat around most of the island today, which is great. So that first boat there has already been lifted out. And then they're going to swing it around and lift out the second boat.
What does it cost roughly per boat to do this?
Oh, there is no cost. No, there's a fisherman's club, and it might be a $20 a year registration to be a member of the fisherman's club. So if you lift your boat out of the water, you just write your name and details in a little book in the control panel there, but it doesn't cost anything each time you do it.
So you operate the crane yourself?
Yes. Yeah, there's only a few people that have been given the key to be able to operate it.
Yeah, you can see Para Handy up there. Right now.
Now during, back in the days, this cliff top here on the right hand side used to have a lot of falling rocks, so you weren't able to even drive down here in really bad weather because it would be too dangerous. So they've since trimmed back all that cliff face, which makes it a lot safer to be able to come down here. During really bad weather you can see waves crashing over the top of that blue crane, which is quite fascinating, yeah. And if you can look inside that rock face as well, when we turn around you'll see a lot of the orangey colour. That's the lava flows through the rock face, because Norfolk is made up of 3 extinct volcanoes. Here we go. So they lift him out, swivel the crane around and lower it straight directly onto the trailer, which I don't see his trailer, so he might have to jump out himself and go and retrieve his own trailer. Kids get taken out of school to be able to go fishing, because when the weather's good you've got to make the most of it. People will fish all year round as well. All it comes down to is whether the seas are flat enough. And then they just drive off with the boat.
Do they just drive it, fishermen, then up?
Pardon?